They thought handing me a pink slip at my own father's funeral was the end of my story. They didn't realize they had just handed me the match to burn their stolen empire to the ground. The sound of my father's framed photograph hitting the bottom of a metal trash can echoed through the empty executive boardroom. I just stood there, watching the shattered glass settle over his smiling face. It had been less than 24 hours since we buried him. Standing at the head of the mahogany table was Vance, my older stepbrother. He didn't even flinch. He just casually adjusted the cuffs of his overly expensive imported suit, looked me dead in the eye, and smiled a cold, venomous smirk. "Save the crocodile tears, Ora Lee," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "You've always been nothing but a glorified secretary playing executive because of your last name. But the free ride is over. You're fired. Pack your desk." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked past him at the two senior board members, Marcus and Elena. They didn't blink. They didn't speak. They just stared at their tablets, brutally silent in their complicity. Slowly, I knelt on the plush corporate carpet. A jagged piece of glass bit into my thumb as I reached into the trash, but I ignored the sting. I pulled my father's picture from the wreckage, brushed the sparkling dust off his face, tucked the frame under my arm, and walked out without a single word. Here is the context they didn't want the world to know. At 32 years old, I wasn't just a name on a door. I was the chief operating officer of this biomedical firm. I had spent the last 10 years pulling all-nighters, sleeping on a cheap cot in the R&D labs, building the core medical technology that actually kept this company profitable. Vance, on the other hand, spent that exact same decade bouncing between European ski resorts and luxury yachts, systematically incinerating his trust fund. But Vance wasn't just throwing his weight around today for the thrill of it. He was drowning. The whispers in the Chicago financial circuits were loud. He owed nearly $30 million to some incredibly ruthless private equity sharks. His back was pinned against the wall, and to save his own skin, he needed cash immediately. So he orchestrated this ambush. He bought off Marcus and Elena with promises of massive golden parachutes, forming a voting bloc that completely outweighed my 49% inheritance. His plan? Force a rapid fire sale of my father's life's work to a vulture capital firm just to bail himself out of a massive hole. They assumed I would break. They expected a tantrum, or worse, that I would beg for my job. But they vastly underestimated who they were dealing with. As the elevator dropped to the concrete parking garage, my heels echoed in the hollow space. I got into my car, gripped the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned stark white, and swallowed the heavy lump forming in my throat. I pulled out my phone and opened a text thread with my closest friend and absolute shark of a corporate attorney, Sarah. I typed 3 words. "It is time." Before I could even put the car in drive, my phone buzzed with a company-wide email alert. Subject line, leadership transition. Vance couldn't even wait an hour. He blasted a message to all 400 employees, hiding behind sterile corporate jargon about restructuring. At the very bottom, he added a personal, arrogant sign-off. "The princess has left the castle. Time to get back to real work." My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. Suddenly, my phone rang. It was Dr. Eris, the head of our R&D division. "Ora Lee," he gasped, his voice trembling, completely stripped of its usual calm authority. "He's destroying it. Demolition starts Monday. He's gutting clean rooms to build a VIP executive lounge. But that's not the worst part. He's selling the entire autoimmune patent portfolio, the exact therapy that gave your dad 3 extra years of life. He's handing it over to Vanguard Medical for pennies on the dollar. The final paperwork is being drafted right now." Vanguard. The exact vulture capitalists my father absolutely despised. Vance was stripping the soul out of our life's work just to secure a golden parachute for himself. He was going to burn down a legacy of saving human lives just so he could pay off his private equity bookies. This was no longer just a bitter family feud over a leather chair. This was a hostage situation, and Vance was a deeply insecure, terrified man wielding a wrecking ball directly at my family's heart. I hung up the phone. The shock vanished. It was instantly replaced by pure, ice-cold adrenaline. You see, Vance believed power lived inside custom suits and closed-door boardrooms. He thought the people who mopped the lab floors, maintained the servers, and guarded the gates were completely invisible. He spent weeks buying off the wealthy directors, totally blind to the actual foundation of the company. That arrogant delusion was his fatal flaw. Years ago, my father established an employee stock ownership plan. He granted 11% of the company to the original founding blue-collar workers, the lifers. Vance treated them like disposable furniture. I treated them like family. I drove straight to the working-class neighborhood on the south side of the city. I sat at Maria's cramped kitchen table. She had cleaned our laboratories for 15 years. Hank, our senior security guard, sat right next to her, still wearing his badge. I didn't give them a corporate speech. I just slid Vance's demolition order and the Vanguard sale contract across the scratched wood. They read the paperwork. They saw exactly how little Vance valued their sweat and loyalty. Hank's jaw tightened into stone. Maria's hands shook, not from sadness, but from pure, unadulterated rage. I pushed a single legal document toward them, an irrevocable voting proxy. I told them, my voice completely steady, keep your shares, keep your dividends. You earned every single penny. Just lend me your voice in the boardroom today. Let me hold the microphone. Maria grabbed the pen and signed her name with brutal force. Hank took the pen next. Within 2 hours, I visited 6 more original employees, mechanics, warehouse leads, night shift supervisors. Every single one of them signed the proxy without a second of hesitation. I bypassed the banks. I skipped the multi-million-dollar buyout negotiations. By leveraging the sheer loyalty my father left behind, my voting power legally and instantly jumped to an absolute 60% majority. I possessed the ultimate weapon, and Vance had absolutely no idea it was pointed right at his head. At 2 p.m., the main lobby buzzed with frantic energy. 400 employees stood packed shoulder to shoulder for a mandatory town hall meeting. At the front, standing on a raised platform, Vance held a crystal champagne flute, wearing a sickeningly bright smile. He spoke smoothly into the microphone, spinning the absolute destruction of my father's life's work as a strategic merger. I pushed through the heavy double doors at the back of the room. The crowd parted instantly, creating a dead straight path to the podium. The woman walking down that aisle was not a secretary. She was an executioner. I marched straight up the steps of the platform. Vance stopped mid-sentence. His fake smile faltered. "What is she doing here?" he hissed at Marcus, covering the microphone. "Call security." I stepped right into his personal space and slammed a heavy manila folder directly onto the podium, right over his neatly printed cue cards. "This is a written consent of shareholders, signed and legally executed 10 minutes ago by a 60% absolute voting majority." Vance stared at the thick stack of papers. His brain simply refused to comprehend the words. "Effective immediately, the board of directors is completely dissolved," I continued. I turned my head to look Marcus and Elena dead in the eye. They stepped backward as if they had been physically struck. "And Vance, your contract as Chief Executive Officer is permanently terminated. You do not work here anymore." Vance's hand began to shake violently. The crystal champagne flute slipped from his trembling fingers. It shattered against the hard floor, splashing expensive wine all over his polished Italian shoes. All the color completely drained from his face. The smug, untouchable billionaire vanished. In his place stood a desperate, sweating man, realizing his $30 million lifeline had just been severed. "You cannot do this," he screamed, his voice cracking. A thick bead of sweat rolled down his forehead. "Security," I called out calmly, stepping back from the podium. "Get this trespasser out of my building." Hank stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. He adjusted the heavy radio belt around his waist and cracked a wide, deeply satisfied smirk. He didn't ask politely. He grabbed Vance firmly by the bicep, his thick fingers digging deep into the expensive wool. Vance thrashed and sputtered, spitting panicked threats about lawsuits. Hank just yanked him forward, physically dragging him down the center aisle. In the front row, Maria crossed her arms over her blue janitorial uniform. A slow, proud smile spread across her face. Someone in the back started clapping. Within 3 seconds, the entire lobby erupted into deafening applause. I stood at the podium looking out over the sea of faces, finally breathing in the clean air. But the real masterstroke happened later that night. My phone buzzed on my nightstand. A single text message from Vance. "You only got an empty shell." Driven by pure spite and desperation, Vance had logged into our servers from his mansion. He planned to download the core intellectual property and sell it to Vanguard on the black market before his termination was fully processed by HR. What he didn't know was that my attorney and I had been waiting for this exact move. We didn't lock him out of the system. We built a door, left it wide open, and turned on the lights. Our technical team had already corralled his specific login into a secure sandbox honeypot. The files he frantically downloaded were not our life-saving patents. They were watermarked dummy data, heavily monitored by the Federal Cybercrimes Task Force. Every single click, every single transferred file was a time-stamped felony for federal economic espionage. I didn't destroy him. I just handed him a shovel, and he dug his own grave. At exactly 6 a.m. the next morning, federal agents kicked down the custom mahogany front door of his estate. They dragged him out onto his manicured lawn in his silk pajamas, his hands firmly cuffed behind his back. By noon, Marcus and Alina submitted their unconditional resignations to avoid federal conspiracy charges. 3 months later, the gavel came down. The judge sentenced Vance to 84 months in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of parole, and ordered the liquidation of his personal assets to pay restitution. He lost the mansion, he lost the cars. He became a ghost. Today, I'm sitting at my father's desk. The city skyline is glowing behind me. Hank now runs our entire regional security division, and Maria's granddaughter just started an internship in our accounting department, fully paid for by a scholarship fund we established in my father's name. If you are dealing with a toxic narcissist or someone who thinks they can walk all over you, remember this: true power isn't bought with expensive suits or loud tantrums. Real power is earned through respect, strategy, and cold, hard facts. You don't need to scream to get revenge. You just need to build a door, leave it unlocked, and let their own boundless greed walk them right into a prison cell. No one can extinguish your fire unless you hand them the water. Keep your fire burning.